Rev up your engines! Here we have a Toyota Camry that's been to hell and back and has made it to tell the tale. It's a 2007, and yes, it's got that 4-cylinder engine that burns oil, but as long as you keep putting oil in it, it keeps rolling down the road. Now, I know the total history of the car because it used to be my son's car. Now it's my grandson's car. Now, at first look, you say, oh, look at the paint. It's horrible. Okay, it's all peeling off here, and it's all peeling off here, but you can't blame Toyota on that. That is crappy Mako paint jobs. They say, Mako, we'll paint any car for whatever, right? Well, they don't do such a hot job. It didn't hold up. If you look at the original paint, it's still in pretty good shape. This is the Mako paint that they didn't know what they were doing. They didn't prime it right, and it all peeled off. And you can't blame the car for this. You can blame a raccoon. Now, the raccoon didn't survive the collision, but the car did. It's been this way for a few years. It still runs perfectly fine. Well, of course, the raccoon does not. It doesn't have that many miles on it. It's an 07, 154,668 miles on it. So we'll get my boat gaff hook here. I've gone up in the world here. Stick it in the hood. Who'd ever thought you're going to use a boat gaff for that? The 2.4 liter VVTi engine that does burn oil. They didn't build the piston rings right, so they burn oil. Toyota fixed some of them. They say this one's too old. They're not going to fix it free. Now, he said he was doing over 100 cruising. Had no problem with it running. He just adds oil and he changes the spark plugs every once in a while. It runs perfectly fine. Otherwise, it's not like, oh, it's a junkie, you got to get rid of it. Realize if it's only the piston rings that are worn, the engine can still run quite some time. It will burn oil, but as long as you put the oil in, it will continue to run. Back in my grandfather's day, all cars burn oil. When people would come into the gas station, we checked the oil. Most of the engines didn't have oil filters on them. You'd add oil when you filled the car with gas. You'd add a little bit of oil. You might have seen some of those old-timey movies where there's a hardware store and they also sell gasoline. They have a little jug of oil and they always check the oil and they check the water and put more water in it. You don't have to do it all that often. He came from Tennessee to here. He's driven 1,800 miles so far, so he had to put a couple of quarts of oil in. No big deal. I'm trying to make it look a little bit better. You can see they spill a lot of things. I put on these cool seat covers that a company sent me, and I gotta say, they're nice looking seat covers. As you can check out my wife's Matrix, I put the gray set in hers. They look phenomenal, and they are very comfortable. And it's not one of these things you gotta be a genius to put them on. They just slide on. There's a zipper on the top when they slide in. There's metal clamps on the bottom you clip. Very easy to put in. They seem very solid. He had a real cheap one, and I took that off and threw it away. Start her up and see what this old engine sounds like. It's a Toyota. It starts right up. It burns a little bit of oil, but it's not some gross polluter that looks disgusting when you're going down the road. Now, my grandson's 21, but he drove this as a teenager, so, you know, teenagers want their privacy. Check it out. Little drape action going here. There's all kinds of stuff you can get for these Camrys. It's aftermarket up the wazoo. Get back inside with these comfy seat covers. Still idle smooth. Doesn't shake. 4-cylinder engine burns oil. It still goes down the road. The AC still blows freezing cold. The heat works. And my son used to have neon lights and stuff hooked up all over the place. They don't exist anymore, but you can still tow stuff with it. They had nice deep trunks. He brings his oil with him, and as I said earlier, Mako should be ashamed of the horrible work they did on the car, which is one big reason I tell people, try to stay away from chain auto repair collision shops. This thing obviously wasn't prepared correctly. It wasn't sprayed right. It all peeled off. They had to replace the hood. This is the original paint. This paint, 16 years old. This paint is like 6 years old. They just did a horrible job, that's all. These are just plastic covers. But hey, you go far enough away, and they look like alloy wheels. With paint like that, do you really care about the wheels? Now, this has been a relatively southern car. It started out in Fayetteville, North Carolina. It went to Houston, Texas. Spent the majority of its life in Clarksville, Tennessee. So when we look under, it's not going to be all rusted. It's got superficial rust, but solid as can be. We'll ignore the flashing TPMS system because that hasn't been hooked up for years. Now we get on the old bumpy road here, and as old as this thing is, it doesn't ride all that poorly. It still goes down the road, still handles quite well. And sure, it's not a race car, but you see as we take off onto the road here, it's still got some guts to it. Shifts like a dream. It's got plenty of power. And yeah, it's not going to get the gas mileage of that Prius in front of us, but it still gets 30-something miles a gallon on a highway. Still idling smooth as silk. And like I said, the transmission shifts perfectly fine. Now, I personally drove this vehicle from Houston to Mexico and back years ago when it was pretty new, and it pretty much runs the same as it did back then. Looked a little bit better back then, though. It didn't have the crappy Mako paint job. And as you can see, there's some crazy people here in Rhode Island, too, putting wacky signs up. The craziness of Americans is not delimited by state borders, I'll tell you that. There's nuts everywhere. There's just something about these Camrys that exude confidence that it's going to get you where you're going. It's not going to break down. It's not going to use up too much gas, and you don't really have to worry about your form of transportation. And even though it looks like this, I would have no qualms of getting in this car and driving to California and back. Now, my wife, on the other hand, she wouldn't be seen dead because she doesn't like looking in ragged cars. She wants her cars clean. This thing doesn't run any different than it did when it was new and I drove it from Houston to Mexico and back. It's amazing how these things can run mechanically. Yeah, you got to put a little oil in it. Just remember to put the oil in it, because I had a customer in Houston with one, and she said, my car sounds weird. So she brought it over. There's no oil on a dipstick. Changed the oil. Half a quart of oil came out of it. Did you check your oil? She said, what's a Toyota? I never checked my oil. I had it changed in June, and this was like 4 months later. It burns oil. You gotta add oil. The engine was rattling, sounded horrible. After I changed the oil, it didn't make any noise, and she drove it for years after that. Just remember, if you got one that burns oil, carry it in a jug in the back and check it every once in a while. It's not like you gotta do it every 10 seconds. That's the way cars used to be anyways. Every time you filled them up with gas, you would add oil and water. Now, being a Toyota, it shouldn't use them at all. If you add it, and you can still drive this thing all over the place. It's going back to Tennessee in a few days. They're amazing bits of technology. That's why they sold so many of them. And when it was new and shiny, it was a really nice looking car. Now, yeah, it's a beater, but it's a beater that'll get you where you're going and not break down. And here's some bonus questions and answers. Victor Fernandez says, hey, I'm from Norton, Massachusetts. Can't afford a Toyota Tacoma, but I can a Nissan Frontier. What do you think? Not a bad second choice. They're decent built vehicles. See, Nissan always made decent trucks. They used to make good cars too, but Renault took over Nissan. It just went down the toilet. But they still make decent trucks. They're decent trucks, and you can get them a lot cheaper. Okay, I'll give you a perfect example. Jatco makes the world's worst front-wheel drive automatic transmissions. The Jatco automatic transmissions for trucks that are rear-wheel drive instead of front-wheel drive, they're pretty decent transmissions. So they did trucks a lot better than they did cars. So, no, it's a used vehicle, I'm assuming you're talking. And if so, you want a mechanic to check it out. But if you're talking brand new, no, they can be decent trucks from the get-go. Brad H says, Scotty, is it possible to convert a two-wheel drive to a four-wheel drive? And if so, it's a good idea. My dad's giving me his 03 Chevy Suburban, but it's only two-wheel drive. No, don't waste your time trying to convert it. It is a gigantic rat's nest doing that. Things have to be custom made. You got to buy parts. And if you're talking about used, it's a 20-year-old vehicle. You're going to be buying 20-year-old used parts. Who knows if they're any good? You want a four-wheel drive vehicle, buy one. Don't convert it. The same thing I tell people. Well, I want to put a standard transmission in this car. I don't like the automatic. It is such a job converting a car from an automatic transmission to a standard transmission. In any modern fuel-injected vehicle, just go out and buy one that's already set up that way. Don't convert what you have. It's too much of a rat's nest. I've seen guys do it, and every single one of them later regretted and kicked themselves in the rear end. Like, oh man, why did I do that? Such a headache. It doesn't work right, and I'm buying used parts anyways, used transmissions. I don't know if they're any good. I would stay away from that idea. Johan says, Scotty, what do you think of buying a new Ford Lightning? You're talking electric pickup trucks, right? I would never buy anything new that came out from any company, especially when it's their first electric pickup truck. Who knows how it's going to work? They give you these range estimates, and then they say, well, here's how far it's going to go. And then they say, if you put 1,000 pounds into the cargo bay, you'll go a little bit less further. They don't give any figures on how low it goes when you start towing 10,000 pounds. Because I know a guy in Canada with a Tesla. They're rated at 300-something miles. He towed a tiny little bass boat. He got 80 miles and he didn't have enough to go back. And that's only 1/6 260 and it was rated at 300. I don't know. I would never buy a new electric vehicle anyways, especially from a company that never made them. Who knows what kind of problems they're going to have. Look at the problems that they're having with the Broncos they made in Mexico. Look at the problem that they're having with the Mavericks. Brand new electric trucks, I would be extremely leery. And they're going to be super expensive. They say, we're going to be under this. Yeah, the ones that have long range, they're going to start at like 75 grand and they'll jack the prices up because, oh, we don't have enough cars now, so we're going to jack our prices up. I would wait years to see how that panned out. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.